When the sun stood still, a desperate mother collapses at a stranger's gate with her dying son. But the rancher who saves them demands a price that will bind her forever. In the scorching summer of 1883, Evelyn Carter must choose between the brutal prairie that's killing her child and a marriage that might trap them both. One knock, one decision, one chance before the sun sets on everything she loves. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this opening grabbed you, hit that like button and settle in, because what happens next will change everything. The Wyoming sun hung like a brand in the white sky, pressing heat into every living thing below. It was the kind of summer that turned the prairie into a furnace, where the air shimmered in waves and even the wind offered no relief, only the smell of dust and scorched grass. The land stretched in all directions, broken only by fence lines that disappeared into the haze, and the silence was so complete it felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. Evelyn Carter walked that fence line with her son in her arms. Noah's head lolled against her shoulder, his small body slack and burning with fever. His lips were cracked, his breathing shallow, and his eyes, when they opened at all, were glassy and unfocused. He hadn't spoken in hours, hadn't cried. That was what frightened her most. Children were supposed to cry when they hurt. Silence meant surrender. She stumbled, her boot catching on a stone she didn't see, and nearly went down. Her knees buckled, but she locked them, swaying in place with Noah clutched against her chest. Her dress clung to her skin, soaked through with sweat and dust, and her hair hung in damp tangles around her face. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had clean water. Couldn't remember the last time she'd slept without one eye open, listening for footsteps in the dark. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since they'd left the last town, walking because there was no money for a stage and no horses to carry them. 3 weeks of sleeping under open sky, rationing the last of their bread, filling canteens from creek water that made Noah sicker instead of better. 3 weeks of running from a man who believed Noah's inheritance belonged to him, who'd hired men to bring the boy back by any means necessary. The fence line continued ahead, unbroken and endless. Evelyn forced herself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other, though her legs trembled and her vision blurred at the edges. The heat was a living thing now, crushing down on her shoulders, squeezing the air from her lungs. She tasted salt and copper. Her lips split when she tried to swallow. Noah whimpered, a soft, broken sound that cut through her like a blade. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, though her voice came out cracked and raw. "I know. Just a little farther." But she didn't know how much farther. Didn't know if there was anything ahead except more prairie, more heat, more emptiness. The last ranch they'd passed had been 2 days ago, and the woman there had turned them away with hard eyes and a loaded rifle, warning Evelyn not to come back. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. A woman alone with a child was either desperate or dangerous, and decent folk didn't open their doors to either. She shifted Noah's weight, trying to ease the burning in her arms, and kept walking. The sun climbed higher. The world turned white. Then, through the shimmer of heat and exhaustion, she saw it. Buildings, dark shapes rising from the flat land, solid and real. A ranch house, a barn, corrals with horses moving slow in the shade, smoke rising from a chimney even in this heat, which meant someone was cooking, which meant people, which meant... Hope flared so sharp it hurt. Evelyn's pace quickened, though her body screamed in protest. She stumbled forward, clutching Noah tighter, her eyes fixed on those distant buildings like they were salvation itself. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, louder than the silence, louder than the wind. "Please, please let them help us, please." The ranch grew larger as she approached, details sharpening through the haze. A well-maintained fence, clean white paint on the porch railings, curtains in the windows. It was a place that spoke of order, of stability, of someone who cared enough to keep things from falling apart. She reached the gate and nearly collapsed against it, her legs finally giving out. She caught herself on the post, gasping, Noah's fevered body pressed between her and the wood. For a moment she just stood there, shaking, trying to find the strength to move the last few yards. Then the front door opened. A man stepped onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in work clothes that had seen use but weren't worn through. He was maybe 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains in the distance. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, taking in Evelyn and the boy with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. He didn't speak, just stood there, one hand resting on the porch rail, waiting. Evelyn forced herself upright. "Please," she said, and the word came out barely a whisper. She tried again, louder. "Please. My son, he needs water, medicine, he's burning up." The man's gaze shifted to Noah, and something changed in his face. Not softness exactly, but a tightening around the eyes, a flicker of recognition. He'd seen fever before, knew what it meant. He came down the steps without a word, crossing the distance between them in long strides. And when he reached her, he didn't hesitate. He took Noah from her arms with the same calm efficiency a doctor might use, cradling the boy's limp body against his chest and turning back toward the house. "Come on," he said over his shoulder. His voice was low, rough-edged, but steady. "Get inside before you collapse too." Evelyn followed, her legs moving on instinct because her mind had gone blank with relief and exhaustion. She made it up the porch steps, through the door, and into a room that was blessedly cool, shaded, with windows open to catch what little breeze existed, and the smell of coffee and something cooking on the stove. The man laid Noah on a long sofa near the window, his movements careful and straightened. "Sit down before you fall down," he told Evelyn, nodding toward a chair. She sat, her body folded into the seat like something with its strings cut, and she realized she was shaking, tremors running through her arms and legs that she couldn't control. She watched as the man disappeared into another room and returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a leather satchel that looked like a medical kit. He knelt beside Noah and began working with the kind of quiet competence that came from experience. He soaked a cloth in the water and pressed it to the boy's forehead, then his wrists, his neck, opened the satchel and pulled out a small brown bottle, measuring something into a spoon. "Fever reducer," he said, glancing at Evelyn. "He'll need to take this every few hours until it breaks." "When's the last time he had water?" Evelyn tried to think, but her thoughts were slow and tangled. "This morning, maybe, from a creek." The man's jaw tightened. He lifted Noah's head gently and got the medicine into him, then followed it with water from a clean cup, coaxing the boy to swallow even in his delirium. Noah coughed, sputtered, but kept it down. "He needs rest," the man said, lowering Noah back onto the sofa and covering him with a light blanket. "Clean water, decent food, and time. If the fever doesn't break by tomorrow, we'll need a doctor." Evelyn nodded, though she had no idea how she'd pay for a doctor. Had no idea how she'd pay for any of this. The man straightened and looked at her, really looked at her, the way someone might study a problem they were trying to solve. "You've been on the road a while." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Running from something." She hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in lying. He could see it in her clothes, her condition, the desperation that clung to her like the dust on her skin. "What's chasing you?" he asked. Evelyn's throat tightened. She looked at Noah, still and pale on the sofa, and felt the weight of every choice she'd made to get them here pressed down on her chest. "His uncle," she said quietly, "my late husband's brother. Noah inherited land, good land with water rights. His uncle wants it, wants Noah under his guardianship so he can control it. And you won't let him." "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "Noah's uncle doesn't care about him. He never did. He just wants what the boy stands to inherit. I won't let him take my son and lock him away in some boarding school while he bleeds the estate dry." The man was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to the stove, poured coffee into 2 tin cups, and brought one to Evelyn. She took it with trembling hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. "How long have you been running?" he asked. 3 weeks, maybe more. I lost track." "And you think you can keep running?" It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "I don't have a choice." The man took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. "You have a choice," he said. "You just don't like the options." Evelyn bristled, some spark of defiance flaring through the exhaustion. "What would you know about it?" "I know what it looks like when someone's out of road." He gestured toward Noah. You're not going to make it another week out there, not in this heat, not with the boy sick. She wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat because he was right. She knew he was right. She'd known it before she knocked on his door. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Evelyn. Evelyn Carter." Samuel Reed. He set his cup down on a side table and crossed his arms, leaning back against the wall. "This is my ranch. I run cattle, about 2,000 head, with a dozen hands working year-round. I'm a widower. No children. No family to speak of." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Samuel's gaze shifted back to Noah. "The boy's inheritance makes him valuable. His uncle won't stop looking. Even if you make it to the next territory, he'll find you eventually. Men like that don't give up on money." "I know," Evelyn whispered. "So you need something more permanent than running." She looked up at him, her heart starting to pound again for a different reason. There was something in his tone, something calculated, deliberate. "What are you suggesting?" Samuel met her eyes, his expression carved from stone. "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them, stark and impossible. Evelyn stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm serious." Samuel's voice didn't change, didn't soften. He spoke like he was discussing cattle prices or fence repairs, practical, businesslike. "You need legal protection. The boy needs a father's name and a father's claim. I need—" He paused, something flickering across his face too fast to read. "I need an heir, someone to leave this place to when I'm gone." "You don't even know us," Evelyn said, her voice rising despite herself. "You don't know anything about me, about Noah." "I know you're desperate enough to walk 3 weeks through summer heat with a sick child," Samuel said. "I know you're willing to fight for him. That's more than most people would do." He pushed off the wall, his posture still relaxed but his eyes sharp. "This isn't about romance, Mrs. Carter. It's about survival. Yours, the boys, and maybe mine too." Evelyn's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was offering. "Why would you do this? What do you get out of it?" "A son," Samuel said simply. "Legal and legitimate. Someone to inherit the ranch, carry on the work. I'm not a young man anymore. I won't live forever. And when I die, everything I've built will either go to family or get carved up by lawyers and creditors. This way it stays whole. It means something." "You want to buy my son's future?" Samuel's expression hardened. "I want to protect it. There's a difference." He moved to the window, looking out at the scorched prairie. "If you marry me, the boy becomes mine by law. His uncle has no claim. The inheritance stays in trust until Noah's old enough to manage it himself. And in the meantime, he grows up here, safe, fed, educated. You both do." Evelyn's chest felt tight. She looked at Noah, so small and still on the sofa, his breath coming in soft, labored gasps. She thought of the road behind them, the endless miles of nothing, the towns that turned them away, the men who were hunting them. She thought of the sun, relentless and burning, and how close they'd come to dying under it. "What if I say no?" she asked quietly. Samuel turned from the window. "Then I'll let you rest here tonight, give the boy medicine and food, and send you on your way in the morning with enough provisions to make it to the next town." His voice was even, but there was steel underneath. "But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Carter. You won't make it much farther. And when his uncle catches up, you'll have no legal ground to stand on. He'll take the boy, and there's nothing you'll be able to do about it." The truth of it settled over Evelyn like a weight. She closed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion in her bones, the fear that had driven her for weeks, the desperation that had brought her to this door. "How would it work?" she asked, opening her eyes. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased slightly. "We'd go to town tomorrow. File the marriage certificate, start the legal adoption process for Noah. I'd hire a lawyer to make sure everything's airtight, the inheritance protected, your rights secured, the boy's future guaranteed." He paused. "You'd live here. You'd be my wife in name and law. Whatever else happens between us is something we figure out as we go. And if it doesn't work, then we deal with it when the time comes." Samuel's voice was steady. "But I don't go back on my word, Mrs. Carter. If I say I'll protect you and the boy, I will, no matter what." Evelyn stared at him, searching his face for deception, for cruelty, for anything that would tell her this was a mistake. but all she saw was a man who'd learned to survive by making hard choices and sticking to them. She looked at Noah again, at the rise and fall of his small chest, the flush of fever on his cheeks, the trust he'd placed in her to keep him safe. She'd walked 3 weeks through hell to save him. What was one more impossible choice? "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll marry you." Samuel nodded once, as if she'd just agreed to a business contract. "Good. We'll leave for town at first light. For now you need rest. There's a room upstairs, second door on the left. Clean sheets, water for washing. I'll keep an eye on the boy." Evelyn stood on shaking legs, but she didn't move toward the stairs. "Mr. Reed." "Samuel." "Samuel." She swallowed hard. "Thank you." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Carter. We've got a long road ahead." She nodded and turned toward the stairs, her body moving on autopilot. As she climbed, she heard Samuel settling into a chair near Noah, the soft sound of him dipping a cloth in water, the murmur of his voice as he spoke to the boy in low, steady tones. Evelyn reached the second floor and found the room he'd mentioned, simple, clean, with a bed that looked like heaven after weeks of sleeping on hard ground. She closed the door behind her and stood in the silence, letting the reality of what she'd just agreed to sink in. She was going to marry a stranger. She was going to bind herself and Noah to a man she'd known for less than an hour, in a bargain struck out of desperation and necessity. She was going to stop running. Evelyn sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking, and for the first time in 3 weeks she let herself cry, not from fear, but from exhaustion, relief, and the terrible, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to survive. Downstairs, Samuel Reed sat beside the sleeping boy and listened to the sound of Evelyn's footsteps overhead. He'd meant every word he'd said. He needed an heir, needed someone to carry on the work he'd poured his life into. And if that heir came with a desperate mother willing to fight the world to protect him, well, Samuel respected that kind of strength. He'd lost his own wife 5 years ago to fever, buried her on the hill overlooking the north pasture where the wildflowers grew. He'd thought that was the end of family for him, the end of anything soft or warm in a life built on hard ground and harder choices. But maybe he'd been wrong. Samuel dipped the cloth in water again and pressed it to Noah's forehead, watching the boy's face relax slightly in his fevered sleep. The child was small, fragile, nothing like the son Samuel had imagined when he was younger. But he had his mother's stubborn chin, and that counted for something. "You're going to be all right, son," Samuel said quietly. "I give you my word." The house settled around them, cool and still in the summer heat. Outside, the sun blazed on, relentless and unforgiving. But inside, in the shade of Samuel Reed's ranch, 3 lives balanced on the edge of something new, something built not on love, but on survival, necessity, and the fragile promise that sometimes protection was enough. Tomorrow they'd go to town. Tomorrow they'd make it legal. Tonight they'd rest. And the world, for once, could wait. The morning came too fast, breaking pale and hot over the prairie. Evelyn woke to the sound of footsteps below, the low murmur of men's voices, and the smell of coffee drifting up through the floorboards. For a moment she lay still, disoriented, her body sinking into the softness of the mattress, the first real bed she'd slept in for weeks. Then memory flooded back, sharp and undeniable. The ranch. Samuel Reed. The bargain she'd made. She sat up, her muscles stiff and aching, and moved to the window. Below, Samuel stood in the yard with 2 ranch hands gesturing toward the corrals while they nodded and listened. Even from a distance she could see the way they respected him, the way they stood a little straighter when he spoke, the way they moved quickly when he gave direction. This was a man who commanded without raising his voice, who built loyalty through competence rather than cruelty. Evelyn pressed her hand against the glass, watching him, and felt something twist in her chest. She'd agreed to marry this stranger, to let him claim her son as his own, to build a life here on terms she barely understood. She turned from the window and dressed quickly in the same dusty clothes from yesterday, trying to smooth the wrinkles with her hands. There was a basin of clean water on the dresser. Samuel must have brought it up while she slept, and she scrubbed her face and hands, washing away 3 weeks of road grime as best she could. When she looked in the small mirror above the basin, A different woman stared back. Thinner, harder, but alive. She went downstairs and found Noah awake on the sofa, propped up with pillows, his color better than it had been the night before. Samuel sat in a chair nearby, feeding the boy spoonfuls of broth from a bowl, patient and methodical. "Mama," Noah said when he saw her, his voice weak but clear. Evelyn crossed the room and knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his forehead. The fever had broken. His skin was still warm, but the dangerous heat was gone. Relief flooded through her so strong her vision blurred. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, smoothing his hair back. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Noah said, "and hungry." Samuel offered her the bowl. "He's kept down 2 spoonfuls so far. Welcome. That's progress." Evelyn took the bowl and spoon, and Samuel stood, moving toward the stove to refill his coffee cup. She fed Noah slowly, letting him set the pace, and watched as the boy's eyes tracked Samuel across the room with curious, cautious interest. "That's Mr. Reed," Evelyn said quietly. "He's helping us." Noah looked at Samuel, then back at his mother. "Are we staying here?" The question hung in the air. Evelyn glanced at Samuel, who stood with his back to them, pouring coffee as if he weren't listening to every word. "Yes," Evelyn said. "We're staying." Noah accepted this with the easy trust of childhood and took another spoonful of broth. Samuel turned from the stove, cup in hand, and met Evelyn's eyes across the room. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, an understanding. The decision was made. Now came the execution. "We need to leave within the hour," Samuel said. "The ride to town takes about 90 minutes. We'll file the paperwork at the courthouse, meet with my lawyer, and be back before dark." He looked at Noah. "The boy should stay here. My foreman's wife, Clara, will look after him." Evelyn's grip tightened on the spoon. "I don't want to leave him." "He's too weak for the trip," Samuel said, his tone reasonable but firm. "The heat will set him back. Clara's raised 4 children of her own. She knows what she's doing. He'll be safer here." Every instinct in Evelyn screamed against leaving Noah, even for a few hours. She'd kept him within arm's reach for 3 weeks, terrified that if she looked away for even a moment he'd be gone. But Samuel was right. The ride would exhaust Noah, and they needed to move quickly if they were going to make this arrangement legal before anyone came looking. "All right," she said, though the words tasted like ash. Samuel nodded and set his cup down. "I'll bring Clara over. You finish feeding him." He left through the front door, and Evelyn focused on Noah, spooning broth into him until the boy pushed the bowl away gently, his eyelids already drooping. She settled him back against the pillows and pulled the blanket up to his chin, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'll be back soon," she whispered. "I promise." Noah mumbled something she didn't catch, and drifted back to sleep. When Clara arrived, a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, Evelyn gave her instructions she knew were unnecessary, hovering until Samuel appeared in the doorway and cleared his throat. "We need to go," he said. Evelyn forced herself to step away from Noah, to follow Samuel out into the blinding morning sun. A wagon waited in the yard, hitched to 2 horses, and Samuel helped her up onto the bench seat before climbing up beside her. He took the reins and clucked to the horses, and they rolled forward, leaving the ranch behind. The prairie stretched out in all directions, golden and endless under the climbing sun. Evelyn watched the landscape pass, trying to memorize the way back, the landmarks she'd need to know. Samuel drove in silence, his focus on the road, and she was grateful for it. She didn't know what to say to this man she was about to marry, didn't know how to begin a conversation that would shape the rest of her life. After 30 minutes, Samuel spoke without looking at her. "You'll need to tell me the truth about Noah's inheritance. If we're going to protect it, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Evelyn took a breath, forcing herself to focus. "My husband, Daniel, owned 2 sections of land in Montana. Good grassland with creek access. He bought it young, before prices went up, and built it into something valuable. When he died 2 years ago, he left everything to Noah in trust until the boy turns 21. "And his brother?" "Marcus." The name felt like poison on her tongue. Marcus is older, but Daniel never trusted him with money. Marcus drank, gambled, ran through his own inheritance in 5 years. When Daniel died and left everything to Noah, Marcus was furious. He tried to claim guardianship, said I wasn't fit to raise the boy alone. Was there a legal challenge? Yes. It went to probate court. The judge ruled in my favor, said Noah should stay with his mother. Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. But Marcus didn't accept it. He hired men to watch us, to follow us. One night I overheard them talking outside our boarding house. They were planning to take Noah, claim I'd abandoned him, and force a new guardianship hearing in a different county where Marcus had connections. So you ran. I didn't know what else to do. Evelyn's voice cracked. If they took him, I'd never get him back. Marcus would lock him away in some school, drain the estate to pay his debts. And by the time Noah was old enough to claim his inheritance, there'd be nothing left. Samuel was quiet for a moment, processing. Does Marcus know where you are now? No, I've been careful. We stayed off main roads, avoided towns where people might remember us. That won't last, Samuel said. Men like Marcus hire trackers, pay for information. If he wants the boy badly enough, he'll find you eventually. The words sent a chill through Evelyn despite the heat. That's why I need this marriage to be ironclad. If Noah is legally your son, Marcus can't touch him. He can try, Samuel said. He can challenge the adoption, claim fraud or coercion. But if we do this right, if we make sure every piece of paper is filed correctly, every legal requirement met, he won't have grounds to stand on. He glanced at her. My lawyer's name is Thomas Garrett. He's handled every land deal, every contract, every dispute I've had for 15 years. He doesn't lose. Evelyn nodded, trying to draw comfort from the certainty in Samuel's voice. What will you tell him? About us? The truth, Samuel said. That we're entering a legal marriage for mutual benefit. That I'm adopting your son to protect his inheritance and secure my own legacy. Thomas doesn't care about romance. He cares about making sure the paperwork holds up in court. The wagon rolled on, the sun climbing higher. Evelyn watched Samuel from the corner of her eye, studying the hard line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence. He was a stranger, and yet in less than 24 hours he'd done more to protect her and Noah than anyone had in 2 years. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Samuel didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed on the road, but something shifted in his expression, something old and buried. I told you, I need an heir. There are easier ways to get one. You could remarry for love, have children of your own. I was married for love once, Samuel said, and his voice went flat. It ended with me burying my wife on a hill and spending 5 years alone in a house too big for one person. I'm not interested in doing that again. The pain beneath the words was so raw Evelyn almost flinched. I'm sorry. Don't be. Samuel's grip on the reins tightened slightly. She was everything. But she's gone, and I've made my peace with that. What I haven't made peace with is the idea of this ranch dying with me. Everything I've built just scattered to the wind because I didn't have the sense to plan ahead. He looked at her then, direct and unflinching. You need protection. I need a son. It's a fair trade. Evelyn wanted to argue, to say it was more complicated than that, but she couldn't, because he was right. This was a transaction, a bargain born of necessity, and maybe that was better than pretending it was something else. What happens if Noah doesn't want this? She asked. What happens if he grows up and resents you for it? Then I'll deal with it when the time comes, Samuel said. But I'm betting that a boy who grows up safe, fed, and educated won't resent the man who made that possible. Evelyn hoped he was right. The town appeared on the horizon about an hour later, a small cluster of buildings rising from the prairie like an afterthought. As they drew closer, Evelyn could make out the details. A main street lined with wooden storefronts, a church with a white steeple, a courthouse that looked too grand for the size of the town. People moved along the boardwalks, going about their business, and Evelyn felt the weight of their stares as Samuel drove the wagon down the center of the street. She knew what they saw. A dusty, tired woman in a wrinkled dress sitting beside Samuel Reed, the wealthiest rancher in the county. They'd be talking about it before the wagon even stopped. Samuel pulled up in front of a neat brick building with a sign that read Thomas Garrett, attorney at law. He set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help Evelyn descend. His hand was warm and calloused when she took it, and he held on a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching her face. "You ready for this?" he asked. Evelyn thought of Noah, small and fragile on Samuel's sofa. Thought of Marcus and his hired men, somewhere out there, hunting. Thought of the road behind her and the impossible choice ahead. "Yes," she said. Samuel released her hand and led the way inside. The office was cool and dim after the brightness of the street, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and smelling of paper and ink. A man sat behind a large desk, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed in a suit that had seen better days but was still respectable. He looked up when they entered, and his eyebrows rose slightly. "Samuel," he said, standing, "wasn't expecting you today." "Something came up," Samuel said. "Thomas Garrett, this is Evelyn Carter. We're getting married, and I need you to handle the paperwork." Thomas's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw the rapid assessment in his eyes, the way he took in her appearance, her nervousness, the lack of any courtship or announcement that would normally precede a marriage. He was a lawyer. He knew when something didn't add up. "I see," Thomas said slowly. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Sit. Tell me what's going on." They sat, and Samuel laid it out in clear, concise terms. The boy's inheritance, the threat from Marcus, the need for legal protection that only marriage and adoption could provide. Thomas listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin, his gaze moving between Samuel and Evelyn. When Samuel finished, Thomas leaned back in his chair. "You understand what you're asking for?" "I do," Samuel said. "A marriage of convenience can be challenged in court if it's proven to be fraudulent, entered into solely to circumvent the law." "This isn't fraud," Samuel said. "It's a legal contract between two consenting adults. I'm taking responsibility for the boy, and she's agreeing to be my wife. Everything's above board." Thomas looked at Evelyn. "Is that your understanding as well, Mrs. Carter?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Yes. And you're entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion, no duress?" "I'm choosing this," Evelyn said, her voice steady, "for my son's protection and my own." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll draft the marriage certificate and start the adoption paperwork. But you need to understand, if the boy's uncle challenges this in court, you'll both need to be prepared to testify. They'll question the legitimacy of the marriage, your motives, your relationship. It won't be pleasant." "We'll handle it," Samuel said. Thomas pulled a sheet of paper toward him and dipped his pen in ink. "Then let's get started." For the next hour, Thomas asked questions and filled out forms with meticulous precision. Full names, dates of birth, previous marriages, the details of Noah's inheritance, the timeline of events that had led them here. Evelyn answered as honestly as she could, her voice growing hoarse, and Samuel filled in the gaps with the kind of calm authority that made even the strangest details sound reasonable. When the paperwork was finally complete, Thomas set down his pen and looked at them both. "The marriage certificate needs to be filed at the courthouse and witnessed by the county clerk. The adoption will take longer. There's a mandatory waiting period, background checks, a home visit by a court-appointed guardian. But if everything's in order, I'd estimate 6 to 8 weeks before it's finalized." "How do we make sure it's airtight?" Samuel asked. "You live as husband and wife," Thomas said bluntly. "You establish residency together, joint finances, shared responsibilities. You make it clear to anyone who asks that this is a real marriage, not a legal fiction. And if the boy's uncle shows up with lawyers, you call me immediately and let me handle it." Samuel nodded. "Done." Thomas gathered the papers and stood. "Let's go to the courthouse." They walked together down the sun-baked street, drawing more stares from the townspeople. Evelyn kept her head up, refusing to show the fear churning in her stomach. This was happening. In minutes, she would be married to a man she'd known for less than a day. The courthouse was mercifully cool inside, with high ceilings and polished wood floors that echoed with their footsteps. The county clerk, a thin, officious man with spectacles, looked up from his desk and brightened when he saw Thomas. "Mr. Garrett," he said, "what can I do for you?" "Marriage certificate," Thomas said, laying the papers on the desk. "Samuel Reed and Evelyn Carter. We need it filed and witnessed." The clerk's eyes widened slightly as he read the names, but he didn't comment. He retrieved a heavy ledger, opened it to a blank page, and began copying the information with careful, precise handwriting. When he finished, he looked up at Samuel and Evelyn. "I'll need you both to sign here," he said, pointing to the bottom of the certificate. Samuel signed first, his signature bold and clear. Then he handed the pen to Evelyn. She stared at the line where her name would go, and for a heartbeat the enormity of it all crashed over her. This wasn't a game. This wasn't temporary. Once she signed, she would be Samuel Reed's wife in the eyes of the law, bound to him and this ranch, her future and Noah's tied to a man who'd offered them shelter out of necessity rather than love. But Noah was safe, and that was all that mattered. Evelyn signed her name. The clerk blotted the ink, stamped the certificate with an official seal, and made a notation in the ledger. "Congratulations," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure congratulations were in order. "You're legally married." Samuel shook the clerk's hand, and Evelyn did the same, moving through the motions in a daze. They left the courthouse together, stepping back out into the brutal afternoon heat, and Evelyn realized she was trembling. "You all right?" Samuel asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They returned to Thomas's office, where the lawyer handed Samuel a copy of the marriage certificate and a folder full of adoption paperwork. "File these with the probate court as soon as possible," he said, "and keep me informed of any contact from the boy's uncle." "I will," Samuel said. He shook Thomas's hand. "Thank you." Thomas looked at Evelyn, something almost sympathetic in his expression. "Good luck, Mrs. Reed." The name hit her like a physical blow. Mrs. Reed. She wasn't Evelyn Carter anymore. She was someone else now, someone new. They climbed back into the wagon, and Samuel turned the horses toward home. The ride back was quieter than the ride out, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Evelyn watched the prairie roll past and tried to imagine what came next. Living in Samuel's house, raising Noah on his ranch, building some kind of life with a man who'd married her for practicality rather than affection. "What do we tell people?" she asked after a long silence. "When they ask how we met?" Samuel considered. "The truth, more or less. You were traveling, you needed help, we came to an arrangement. People will assume what they want to assume. And if they judge me for it? Let them," Samuel said. "Their opinions don't pay your bills or keep your sons safe." Evelyn almost smiled at that. Almost. The ranch came into view as the sun began its slow descent, the buildings casting long shadows across the yard. Evelyn's heart lifted despite everything when she saw the house, knowing Noah was inside, safe and cared for. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop and helped her down. Clara met them at the door, wiping her hands on her apron, her face creased with concern. "The boy's doing well," she said before Evelyn could ask. "He ate a full bowl of soup and kept it down. He's napping now." Relief flooded through Evelyn so strong her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she whispered. Clara patted her arm. "He's a sweet child. You're lucky to have him." "I know." Clara glanced between Evelyn and Samuel, and understanding dawned in her eyes. "Congratulations," she said, and this time the words sounded genuine. "I'll spread the word to the hands, and if you need any help settling in, Mrs. Reed, you just let me know." There it was again. Mrs. Reed. Evelyn forced a smile. "Thank you, Clara." The older woman left, and Evelyn went inside to find Noah awake on the sofa, looking stronger and more alert than he had that morning. He smiled when he saw her, and she gathered him into her arms, holding him tight. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. Noah nodded. "Miss Clara told me stories, and Mr. Reed has horses. Can I see them tomorrow?" Evelyn looked at Samuel, who stood in the doorway watching them. "Can he?" "If he's strong enough," Samuel said. "We'll see how he feels in the morning." Noah beamed, and Evelyn felt something ease in her chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could build something here that resembled a family, even if it started as a bargain. That night, after Noah was asleep upstairs and the house had settled into quiet, Evelyn found Samuel on the porch, looking out at the dark prairie. She joined him, standing a few feet away, the night air cool against her skin. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for all of this." Samuel didn't look at her. "You already thanked me." "I know, but I mean it." He was quiet for a moment, then, You don't have to keep thanking me, Evelyn. We made a deal. I'm holding up my end, that's all. But it didn't feel like that's all. It felt like more. Like the beginning of something neither of them knew how to name. Evelyn turned to go back inside, but Samuel's voice stopped her. Evelyn, she looked back. We're going to make this work, he said, his voice low and certain. For the boy's sake. Whatever it takes. She nodded, her throat tight. I know. And for the first time since she'd knocked on his door, she believed it. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Evelyn had almost forgotten existed. The steady, predictable pattern of days marked by work rather than flight. She woke each morning to the sound of Samuel moving through the house below, the smell of coffee already brewed, and Noah's small weight pressed against her side where he'd climbed into her bed sometime in the night. The heat continued relentless, but inside the ranch house there was shade, cool water from the well, and meals that came regularly instead of whenever they could scrounge them. Noah grew stronger. The fever didn't return, and within a week he was walking the yard with Evelyn, exploring the barn and corrals with wide eyes and endless questions. Samuel watched from a distance at first, letting the boy come to him in his own time, but Noah's natural curiosity won out. By the end of the second week, Noah was following Samuel like a shadow, pestering him about the horses, the cattle, the workings of the ranch, and Samuel answered each question with the same patient thoroughness he brought to everything else. Evelyn watched them together and felt something shift in her chest, something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite hope, but lived somewhere between the two. The ranch hands accepted her presence without comment, tipping their hats when she passed and calling her Mrs. Reed with the kind of casual respect that said they didn't care how the marriage had come about, only that Samuel seemed content with it. Clara stopped by twice a week with fresh bread or vegetables from her garden, and each time she stayed to visit, teaching Evelyn the names of neighbors, the rhythm of the community, the unspoken rules that governed life this far from anywhere that mattered. It should have felt like peace. It almost did. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. She was in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, kneading dough for bread while Noah colored pictures at the table with paper and pencils Samuel had brought back from town, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. Not the steady rhythm of ranch work, but urgent, purposeful. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window just as Samuel came striding up from the south pasture, his expression grim. A rider appeared in the yard, one of Samuel's hands, a young man named Tom, who usually worked the line camps. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, already talking as Samuel reached him. Evelyn couldn't hear the words, but she saw Samuel's posture change, saw the way his jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists at his sides. He said something sharp to Tom, who nodded and remounted, riding back the way he'd come at the same urgent pace. Samuel turned toward the house. Evelyn met him at the door. "What's wrong?" "There's a man in town asking questions," Samuel said, his voice clipped, "about you and Noah. Showed up at the general store this morning with a photograph, asking if anyone had seen a woman and a boy matching your description." The bread dough slipped from Evelyn's fingers. She caught it against the counter, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she could hear it. "Marcus." "Most likely." Samuel moved past her into the house, already planning. "Tom said the man's well-dressed, carrying himself like someone with money and authority. He's been asking about recent arrivals, new families, anyone who might have come through in the last month." "Did anyone tell him about us?" Evelyn's voice came out thin, breathless. "Not yet. Tom got to me before the man made it to the courthouse." Samuel grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. "But it's only a matter of time. The marriage certificate is public record. If he checks, he'll find it." Evelyn's mind raced, panic clawing at her throat. "We need to leave. We need to take Noah and go—" "No!" Samuel's voice cut through her spiral like a blade. "Running didn't work before, and it won't work now. We stay. We face this head on." "Samuel, you don't understand. I understand that you're legally my wife, and Noah is in the process of becoming legally my son." Samuel's eyes were hard, certain. "That changes everything. Marcus doesn't get to walk in here and take him." "He won't see it that way," Evelyn said, her hands shaking. "He'll claim fraud, coercion, anything he can think of. He'll drag us into court and tear apart everything we've built." "Then let him try." Samuel reached for her hands, stilling them between his own. His grip was warm and steady, and Evelyn found herself clinging to it like an anchor. Listen to me. We knew this was coming. We prepared for it. Thomas has all the paperwork ready, and every ranch hand on this property will testify that this marriage is real and that Noah is thriving here. Marcus can shout all he wants, but the law is on our side now. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that legal documents and witness testimony would be enough to protect them. But she'd learned the hard way that men with money and determination didn't play by the same rules as everyone else. What do we do? She asked quietly. We send for Thomas, Samuel said. We make sure he's ready if this goes to court. And we don't give Marcus any reason to claim we're hiding something or acting guilty. He released her hands and moved toward the door. I'm going into town. I want to see this man for myself, find out what he's telling people. I'm coming with you, Evelyn said immediately. No, you stay here with Noah. I don't want you anywhere near Marcus until we know what we're dealing with. Samuel, Evelyn. He turned back, his expression softer but no less firm. Trust me. Please. She did. That was the terrifying part. Somewhere in the last 3 weeks, she'd started trusting this man she'd married out of desperation. This stranger who'd become the foundation of her new life. Be careful, she said. Samuel nodded once and left. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching him ride out with two of his hands flanking him, and felt the fragile peace of the last weeks begin to crack. Noah appeared at her elbow, tugging her sleeve. Mama, where's Mr. Reed going? Evelyn forced a smile and pulled him close. Just into town, sweetheart. He'll be back soon. But she didn't know if that was true. Didn't know what would happen when Samuel came face to face with the man who'd been hunting them for months. She went back to the kitchen and tried to focus on the bread, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Samuel rode into town with his jaw set and his mind working through possibilities. He'd meant what he said to Evelyn. The law was on their side now, and he had no intention of backing down. But he also knew that men like Marcus Carter didn't give up easily, and legal battles could drag on for months, draining resources and energy until even the righteous lost the will to fight. He wasn't going to let that happen. The town was quiet in the mid-morning heat, most people seeking shade until the worst of the day passed. Samuel tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, where he found the owner, a portly man named Henderson, restocking shelves with the deliberate slowness of someone trying to avoid heavier work. Samuel, Henderson said, straightening, didn't expect to see you today. I heard there was a stranger in town asking questions, Samuel said without preamble. Where is he now? Henderson's expression turned cautious. Last I saw, he was heading toward the saloon. Said he'd wait there for the county clerk to return from lunch. He hesitated. Samuel, this man, he's got the look of someone who doesn't take no for an answer. You might want to tread carefully. Noted, Samuel said, and left. The saloon was dim and relatively cool, empty except for the bartender and a single man sitting at a corner table with a glass of whiskey in front of him. Samuel took him in with one sweeping glance. Mid-40s, expensive suit gone dusty from travel, cold eyes that tracked Samuel's entrance with the predatory focus of someone always calculating angles. Marcus Carter. Had to be. Samuel walked to the bar and ordered coffee, then turned and leaned against it, making no effort to hide the fact that he was studying Marcus just as intently as Marcus was studying him. Marcus spoke first. You're Samuel Reed. I am. Samuel took a sip of coffee. And you're Marcus Carter. Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Surprise, quickly masked. You know who I am. I know you've been hunting your nephew for 3 months, Samuel said evenly. I know you hired men to track him and his mother across 2 territories. And I know you're not going to find what you're looking for here. Marcus's smile was sharp and humorless. Is that so? That's so. Samuel set his cup down. Noah Carter is under my protection now, legally and otherwise. Whatever claim you think you have on him ended the day his mother became my wife. Marcus laughed, a short, ugly sound. Your wife? How convenient. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the table. Tell me, Mr. Reed, how long have you known Evelyn? A month? 2 weeks? Or did you marry her the day she showed up on your doorstep? Samuel's expression didn't change. How long I've known her is none of your concern. Oh, I think it is. Marcus's voice turned sharp. I think a judge will be very interested to hear how quickly this marriage came about. How a desperate woman running from the law just happened to find a wealthy rancher willing to marry her and adopt her son without any courtship, any engagement, any normal process. She wasn't running from the law, Samuel said coldly. She was running from you. Because she kidnapped my nephew, Marcus shot back. Because she violated a court order granting me temporary custody while the estate was being settled. Because she's an unfit mother who— There was no court order, Samuel interrupted. I've seen the probate records. The judge ruled in her favor. Noah stays with his mother, and the inheritance stays in trust until he comes of age. Those are the facts. Marcus's jaw tightened. The facts are that she fled the jurisdiction before proper proceedings could be completed. The facts are that she's been evading legal authorities for months. And the facts are that you married her knowing all of this, which makes you complicit in her crimes. There are no crimes, Samuel said, his voice hard as iron. And you're not taking that boy. Marcus stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He was taller than Samuel had expected, broader, with the kind of presence that came from a lifetime of getting what he wanted through intimidation. He crossed the space between them with deliberate steps, stopping just close enough to make the threat clear. I don't think you understand what you're dealing with, Marcus said quietly. I have lawyers, I have connections. I have the resources to drag this through every court in the territory until you're buried in legal fees and public scrutiny. By the time I'm done, your reputation will be in tatters, your marriage will be annulled, and that boy will be exactly where he belongs, with his family. Samuel held his ground. His family is with me now. A family built on lies and legal manipulation. A family built on protection and care, Samuel said. Which is more than you ever offered him. Marcus's smile was cold. We'll see what a judge thinks about that. He brushed past Samuel and walked out of the saloon, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. Samuel stood there for a moment, his coffee cooling on the bar, and felt the weight of what was coming settle over him. This wasn't going to be resolved quietly. Marcus had come prepared for a fight, and he wasn't going to back down just because Samuel stood in his way. Fine. Samuel had fought for everything he'd built, and he wasn't about to stop now. He left the saloon and rode straight to Thomas Garrett's office. Thomas looked up when Samuel entered, took one look at his face, and set down his pen. Marcus Carter's in town. You heard? Word travels fast. Thomas gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what happened. Samuel recounted the conversation, leaving nothing out. Thomas listened with the focused attention of someone already building a case in his mind, occasionally jotting notes on a piece of paper. When Samuel finished, Thomas leaned back in his chair. He's going to file for an emergency custody hearing, probably within the next few days. He'll claim fraud, parental unfitness, anything he can think of to get temporary custody while the case works through the courts. Can he win? He can make it expensive and miserable, Thomas said bluntly. But no, I don't think he can win. The marriage is legal, the adoption paperwork is in process, and we can demonstrate that Noah is being well cared for in a stable home. The problem is that Marcus is right about one thing. The speed of the marriage looks suspicious. A judge might question the motives. So what do we do? Thomas tapped his pen against the desk, thinking. We go on the offensive. We file a motion to dismiss any custody claim on the grounds that Marcus has no legal standing. We get affidavits from your ranch hands, from Clara, from anyone who can testify to the legitimacy of the marriage and the quality of care Noah's receiving. And we make it clear that Marcus's real interest is the inheritance, not the boy's welfare. Will that be enough? It should be. Thomas met Samuel's eyes. But you need to understand, if this goes to trial, you and Evelyn will both have to testify. You'll be questioned about your relationship, your marriage, your reasons for taking on another man's child. They'll try to find inconsistencies, contradictions, anything that suggests this is a sham. It's not a sham, Samuel said flatly. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You married a woman you'd known for less than a day to protect her son's inheritance. That's not a traditional marriage, Samuel. Traditional doesn't mean legitimate, Samuel said. We made legal vows. We're building a life together. The reasons don't change the reality. I hope a judge sees it that way, Thomas said, because Marcus is going to paint Evelyn as a manipulative woman who seduced you into marriage for your money and protection, and you as a lonely widower who got taken advantage of. Samuel's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Then we prove him wrong. Thomas nodded slowly. All right, I'll start drafting the motions. In the meantime, you and Evelyn need to be visible in town together. Go to church, attend community events, act like a married couple. The more normal this looks, the harder it is for Marcus to claim it's fraud. Understood. Samuel left Thomas's office with a plan forming, but the knot in his chest didn't ease. He told Evelyn the law was on their side, and he believed that. But he also knew that the law wasn't always enough when money and determination were on the other side. He rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. When he reached the house, he found Evelyn on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the road like she'd been there for hours. She came down the steps as soon as she saw him, her face pale and anxious. What happened? Samuel dismounted and told her everything, about Marcus, the threats, the conversation with Thomas. Evelyn listened without interrupting, but he watched the color drain from her face, watched her hands start to shake. He's going to take Noah, she whispered when he finished. No, he's not, Samuel said firmly. He took her by the shoulders, making her look at him. Evelyn, listen to me. We're not running. We're not hiding. We're going to stand up in court and tell the truth. That this marriage is real, that Noah is thriving here, and that Marcus has no claim. Do you understand? What if the truth isn't enough? Her voice cracked. What if they decide the marriage doesn't count, or that I'm unfit, or... Then we appeal, Samuel said, and we keep fighting until we win. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Evelyn stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and slowly nodded. Yes. Good. Samuel released her shoulders. Where's Noah? Inside, drawing pictures. I want to talk to him. Evelyn's expression shifted to alarm. Samuel, he's just a child. He doesn't need to know. He needs to know enough, Samuel said gently. If this goes to court, they might question him. I want to make sure he understands what's happening, in terms he can handle. After a long moment, Evelyn nodded and led him inside. Noah was at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers covered in crayon drawings of horses and barns and stick figures that Samuel assumed were meant to be the people in his life. The boy looked up when they entered, his face brightening. Mr. Reed, look, I drew your horse, see? Samuel sat down across from him, studying the picture seriously. That's good work, son. You got the markings right. Noah beamed. Then he noticed Evelyn's expression and his smile faded. Mama, what's wrong? Samuel reached across the table and rested his hand over Noah's small one. Noah, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you listen carefully? The boy nodded, his eyes wide. Do you remember your Uncle Marcus? Samuel asked. Noah's face shuddered. He pulled his hand back and looked at his mother. I don't want to see him. I know, Evelyn said softly. But he's here, sweetheart. He came looking for us. Is he going to take me away? Noah's voice was very small. No, Samuel said firmly. He's going to try, but I won't let him. Your mama and I, we're married now. That means you're part of this family, and I protect my family. Noah looked between them, processing. But he's scary. He yells at Mama, and he said I had to go live with him. That's not going to happen, Samuel said. But there might be a man, a judge, who asks you some questions. About living here, about how you're being treated, about whether you're happy. If that happens, I need you to tell him the truth. Can you do that? Noah nodded slowly. The truth is, I like it here. I like the horses and Miss Clara's stories, and... He looked at Samuel shyly. And I like you. Something tightened in Samuel's chest. He cleared his throat. I like you too, son. Are you my papa now? The question hung in the air. Samuel looked at Evelyn, who had tears streaming down her face, but nodded. Yeah, Samuel said quietly, if you want me to be. Noah thought about this for a moment, then smiled, small and tentative, but real. Okay. Samuel stood and ruffled the boy's hair. All right, you keep drawing. Your mama and I need to talk. Noah went back to his pictures, and Samuel and Evelyn stepped out onto the porch again. The sun was setting now, streaking the sky with red and orange, and the air had finally started to cool. "He called you Papa," Evelyn said, her voice thick. "I heard." "Samuel, if this goes badly, if Marcus wins—" "He won't," Samuel said, but he pulled her against his side, letting her lean into him, and for the first time since the marriage he held her like she was his, like she belonged there. "He won't. I promise you." Evelyn didn't answer. She just pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself believe him. 3 days later, Thomas's prediction came true. Marcus filed an emergency petition for custody, claiming parental unfitness and fraudulent marriage. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and just like that, the fight began. The week before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation that felt like standing in the eye of a storm, knowing the worst was still coming. Thomas arrived at the ranch the morning after Marcus filed his petition, his leather satchel heavy with documents, and his expression set in the grim determination of a man preparing for battle. He spread papers across Samuel's dining table and walked them through what to expect, his voice steady but his warnings stark. "Marcus hired Victor Hendricks," Thomas said, tapping a finger on one of the documents. "He's out of Cheyenne, expensive, and he doesn't lose often. He'll try to rattle you both on the stand, make you contradict each other, expose any weakness in your story." "It's not a story," Evelyn said quietly. She sat across from Thomas with her hands folded in her lap, but Samuel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckles had gone white. "It's what happened." "To Hendricks, everything's a story," Thomas said, "and his job is to rewrite yours so that you're the villain and Marcus is the concerned family member trying to save a child from a dangerous situation." He looked at Samuel. "He's going to paint you as either a fool who got manipulated or a predator who took advantage of a desperate woman. You need to be ready for both." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I can handle it." "Can you handle them questioning your motives? Asking why a wealthy rancher would marry a vagrant woman he'd known for hours unless she offered him something he wanted?" Thomas's eyes were sharp. "Because that's where they're going with this." "She offered me a son," Samuel said flatly. "I told you that from the beginning. It's not a secret." "Sounds calculated when you say it like that," Thomas said. "In court, you need to make it sound human. You need to make the judge understand that while the circumstances were unusual, the outcome is legitimate. That Noah is better off here than he would be with Marcus." Evelyn spoke up, her voice strained. "What will they ask me?" Thomas turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "They'll ask why you ran instead of fighting in court, why you didn't trust the legal system to protect your son, why you married Samuel so quickly without exploring other options." He paused. "They'll try to make you look unstable, impulsive, willing to do anything, including sell yourself in marriage, to keep control of Noah's inheritance." The words hit Evelyn like a slap. Samuel saw her flinch, saw the shame that flickered across her face before she locked it down. "I didn't sell myself," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying to save my son." "I know that," Thomas said gently, "but you need to say it the right way. You need to make the judge see that you were a mother protecting her child, not a criminal fleeing justice." They spent the rest of the day rehearsing answers, Thomas firing questions at them with the same ruthless precision Hendricks would use in court. He made Evelyn recount the night she'd fled with Noah, the weeks on the road, the moment she'd knocked on Samuel's door. He made Samuel explain his decision to marry her, his reasons for adopting Noah, the ways their lives had changed since that first day. Over and over he pushed them, looking for inconsistencies, for moments where their stories diverged or their answers sounded rehearsed. By the time he left that evening, Evelyn looked hollowed out, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice hoarse. Samuel walked Thomas to his horse, and the lawyer gripped his shoulder briefly. "You're doing the right thing," Thomas said, "but it's going to get worse before it gets better. Hendricks will dig into every aspect of your lives, and Marcus will sit there looking like the wronged party. You can't let it shake you." "It won't," Samuel said, though he felt the weight of the promise settling over him like a yoke. Thomas mounted his horse and looked down at Samuel. "One more thing, keep Noah close. Don't let him out of your sight unless he's with someone you trust completely. If Marcus gets the chance, he'll try to take the boy before the hearing even happens." Samuel's blood ran cold. He'd do that? He's desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous, Thomas said. Just be careful. He rode out, and Samuel stood in the yard watching the dust settle, his mind already working through contingencies. He'd doubled the watch on the property the day Marcus arrived in town, made sure at least 2 hands were always within shouting distance of the house. But Thomas was right. They needed to be more vigilant. He went back inside and found Evelyn at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. He sat down beside her and waited until she looked up. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't stand up in front of a courtroom full of strangers and let them pick apart every choice I've made, every mistake." "Yes, you can," Samuel said, "because the alternative is letting Marcus win." "What if they take him anyway?" Evelyn's eyes were bright with tears. "What if we do everything right, and it's still not enough?" Samuel reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then we appeal. And if we lose the appeal, we find another way. But we don't give up, Evelyn. Not on Noah. Not on this." She stared at their joined hands, and something in her expression shifted, the fear giving way to something harder, more determined. "You really believe we can win?" "I know we can," Samuel said, "because we're telling the truth, and Marcus is trying to steal from a child. That matters." Evelyn nodded slowly, then tightened her grip on his hand. "All right, we fight." "We fight," Samuel agreed. The next few days were a study in forced normalcy. They took Noah to church on Sunday, sitting in the Reed family pew while the congregation whispered and stared. Clara came to visit and made a point of praising how well Noah was doing, her voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring ranches that had gathered for Sunday supper. Samuel made sure he and Evelyn were seen together in town, buying supplies at the general store, picking up mail at the post office, walking down the main street with Noah between them like any other family. The performance exhausted them both, but it was necessary. Every witness who could testify to the normalcy of their marriage, the health and happiness of Noah, was another brick in the wall they were building against Marcus. On the morning of the hearing, Evelyn woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. She dressed in the one good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that Clara had helped her let out and press, and tried to steady her breathing. In the next room, she could hear Samuel moving around, the quiet efficiency of a man preparing for something he couldn't afford to lose. Noah was still asleep, curled up in the bed they'd set up for him in the room that used to be Samuel's wife's sewing room. Evelyn stood in the doorway watching him, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of his chest, the way his hand curled under his cheek. If this went wrong, if they lost... She couldn't finish the thought. Samuel appeared behind her, dressed in a dark suit that made him look every inch the successful rancher he was. He rested a hand on her shoulder, warm and solid. "Clara's coming to stay with him," he said quietly. "He'll be safe." Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. They left before Noah woke, riding into town as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. The courthouse looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more ordinary, just another building where ordinary people came to settle disputes. But Evelyn knew what waited inside, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thomas met them on the courthouse steps, already deep in conversation with a younger man Evelyn didn't recognize. Thomas looked up as they approached and made introductions. "This is James Whitmore, the court-appointed guardian who visited the ranch last week. He'll be providing a report to the judge on Noah's living conditions." Whitmore was maybe 30, with earnest eyes and a careful manner. He shook Samuel's hand, then Evelyn's. "Mrs. Reed, I want you to know that my report is favorable. Your son is clearly being well cared for, and the home environment is stable." Evelyn felt a rush of relief so strong her knees nearly buckled. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Whitmore said. "I'm just reporting what I observed, but it should help your case." They went inside together, their footsteps echoing on the polished wood floors. The courtroom was smaller than Evelyn had imagined, with rows of benches for spectators and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Marcus was already there, seated at a table on the left side with Victor Hendricks beside him. Marcus looked composed, even confident, dressed in an expensive suit that made Samuel's look provincial by comparison. When he saw Evelyn, his expression didn't change, but she saw the cold satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd already won. Thomas guided them to the table on the right, and they sat, Samuel between Evelyn and Thomas, like a buffer. More people filed in, townspeople curious about the spectacle. A few of Samuel's ranch hands who'd come to support them, the county clerk who would keep the record. The room filled with a low murmur of conversation that died when the bailiff stood. All rise for the Honorable Judge William Carlyle. They rose as one, and the judge entered, a gray-haired man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a face that gave nothing away. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every kind of human drama and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. "Be seated," he said. "We're here today on an emergency petition filed by Marcus Carter seeking temporary custody of his nephew, Noah Carter, currently residing with Samuel and Evelyn Reed." He looked at the papers in front of him. "Mr. Hendricks, you may present your opening statement." Hendricks rose, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. He was exactly what Thomas had described, polished, confident, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He buttoned his jacket and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, this case is about a vulnerable child whose inheritance has made him a target for those who would exploit him for their own gain. Marcus Carter is here today not to claim money or property, but to rescue his nephew from a situation that is at best highly irregular and at worst deeply dangerous." Evelyn felt Samuel tense beside her, but he didn't move. Hendricks continued, his voice measured and reasonable. "The facts are straightforward. Evelyn Carter fled Montana with her son in violation of ongoing probate proceedings. She spent weeks on the road, exposing the child to hardship and danger before arriving at Samuel Reed's ranch. Within 24 hours, less than one full day, she had convinced Mr. Reed to marry her and begin adoption proceedings for the boy." He paused, letting that sink in. "Your Honor, no legitimate marriage happens that quickly. No adoption is initiated without proper vetting and consideration. What we have here is a transaction, a desperate woman trading herself and her son's future for protection from the consequences of her own actions." Thomas scribbled a note and slid it to Samuel, but Evelyn couldn't read it. Her vision had gone blurry at the edges, the courtroom tilting sickeningly. "Mr. Carter is the boy's legal next of kin," Hendricks went on. "He has the means to provide a stable home, excellent education, and proper guardianship of the inheritance until Noah comes of age. He is not seeking to profit from his nephew's misfortune. He is seeking to correct a grave injustice before irreparable harm is done." Hendricks looked directly at Evelyn, and his expression was full of manufactured sympathy. "We all understand that Mrs. Reed was frightened and overwhelmed, but fear does not justify kidnapping a child or entering into a fraudulent marriage. The court must act to protect Noah's best interests, and those interests are clearly served by placing him with his family, not with strangers who have known him for mere weeks." He sat down, and the courtroom was silent. Judge Carlyle made a note, then looked at Thomas. "Mr. Garrett." Thomas stood, and when he spoke his voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Your Honor, Mr. Hendricks has presented you with a narrative that is compelling but false. Let me give you the facts. Evelyn Carter did not flee Montana in violation of any court order. She fled because Marcus Carter attempted to circumvent a legal ruling that had already granted her full custody of her son. She did not kidnap Noah. She protected him from a man whose only interest in the boy is the land and water rights he stands to inherit." Thomas moved to stand in front of the judge's bench. "As for the marriage, yes, it happened quickly, but speed does not equal fraud. Samuel Reed is a respected member of this community who has built a successful ranch through hard work and integrity. When Evelyn and Noah arrived at his door in desperate circumstances, he made a choice, not to exploit them, but to offer them protection through legal means. The marriage is valid, the adoption is proceeding through proper channels, and most importantly, Noah is thriving in their care, as Mr. Whitmore's report will confirm." Thomas turned to gesture at Marcus. "Mr. Carter claims to have his nephew's best interests at heart, but the evidence tells a different story. He has no relationship with the boy. He never visited when Noah's father was alive, never offered support after his brother's death, and only appeared when he learned about the inheritance. This is not about family. This is about money. And this court should not reward that kind of opportunism by tearing a child away from a stable, loving home." Thomas sat down, and Evelyn realized she'd been holding her breath. Judge Carlyle reviewed his notes in silence, then looked up. "I want to hear from the principals. Mr. Carter, you may take the stand." Marcus rose and moved to the witness box with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own righteousness. He was sworn in, and Hendricks began questioning him with the smooth precision of a choreographed performance. "Carter, what is your relationship to Noah?" "He's my nephew," Marcus said, his voice warm with false affection. "My younger brother Daniel's only child. When Daniel died, I promised I would look after the boy." "And did you attempt to fulfill that promise?" "I did. I filed for guardianship, believing that Noah needed a stable male presence in his life. His mother—" Marcus glanced at Evelyn with what looked like genuine concern. Was struggling. She had no family, no means of supporting herself and the child. I offered to take them both in, to help them get back on their feet. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists under the table. Every word was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to sound plausible. "But Mrs. Carter refused your help," Hendricks prompted. "She did. And I understood. She was grieving, suspicious of everyone. I didn't push. But when the probate proceedings began and it became clear that the estate was substantial, she became increasingly paranoid. She accused me of trying to steal from Noah, of wanting to control his inheritance. None of it was true, but she wouldn't listen to reason." Marcus's voice dropped, heavy with regret. "And then one night she simply disappeared with the boy. No warning, no explanation. I've been searching for them ever since." "Were you concerned for Noah's safety?" "Desperately," Marcus said. "She had no money, no plan. I was terrified they'd end up—" He stopped, as if overcome with emotion, then continued. "When I finally found out she'd married a stranger and was trying to have Noah adopted, I knew I had to act. This isn't about the inheritance, Mr. Hendricks. This is about saving my nephew from a situation that could destroy his future." Hendricks nodded sympathetically and turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Thomas stood for cross-examination, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Mr. Carter, you said you've been searching for your nephew for months. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And during that search, did you hire private investigators?" Marcus hesitated. "I did." "And did you instruct those investigators to locate Noah and bring him to you by any means necessary?" I wanted him found, that's all." Thomas pulled a paper from his folder and held it up. "Your Honor, I have a sworn affidavit from one of those investigators stating that Mr. Carter offered a substantial bonus if they could retrieve the boy without involving Mrs. Carter. That doesn't sound like the actions of a concerned uncle. That sounds like kidnapping." Hendricks shot to his feet. "Objection! That affidavit is hearsay and hasn't been properly authenticated." "It's a sworn statement, Your Honor," Thomas said calmly. "I can produce the investigator for testimony if needed." Judge Carlyle looked at Marcus with new interest. "I'll allow it for now. Continue, Mr. Garrett." Thomas turned back to Marcus. "Let's talk about your relationship with your brother. When did you last see Daniel before he died?" Marcus shifted in his seat. "I'm not sure exactly. Was it 5 years ago? 10? "We had a falling out," Marcus admitted. "But that doesn't mean I didn't care about him." "What was the falling out about?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "Money. Daniel thought I was irresponsible." "Were you?" "I made some poor investments. It happens." "And when Daniel died, leaving a substantial estate to his son, did you see that as an opportunity to recover from those poor investments?" "Objection!" Hendricks was on his feet again. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "I'm establishing motive, Your Honor," Thomas said. Judge Carlyle nodded. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Carter." Marcus's composure was cracking. "I wanted to help my nephew, that's all. By taking control of his inheritance. By managing it responsibly until he's old enough to do so himself." Thomas let that sit for a moment, then shifted tactics. "Have you ever spent time with Noah? Taken him to dinner? Attended a school event? Sent him birthday presents?" Marcus was silent. "Answer the question, Mr. Carter." "No," Marcus said finally. "But I can change that. If the court grants me custody, if the court grants you custody, you'll have access to Noah's inheritance while he's placed in a boarding school somewhere far from your actual home. Isn't that right?" "That's not—" You have no interest in raising this child, Thomas said, his voice cutting. You have interest in controlling his assets. That's what this is really about. Objection! Sustained, Judge Carlyle said. Mr. Garrett, move on. Thomas nodded and returned to his table. No further questions. Marcus stepped down, his face flushed with anger, and Evelyn felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. Thomas had rattled him, exposed the cracks in his concerned uncle facade, but they weren't done yet. Judge Carlyle looked at the clock. We'll break for lunch and reconvene at 1 o'clock. Mrs. Reed, you'll take the stand this afternoon. The word sent ice through Evelyn's veins. She stood with the others as the judge left, then turned to Samuel. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Samuel took her hand, his grip firm. Yes, you can. Just tell the truth. That's all you have to do. But as they left the courtroom and stepped into the harsh midday sun, Evelyn wondered if the truth would be enough. They didn't eat lunch. Evelyn couldn't have kept anything down even if she'd tried, and Samuel seemed to understand that sitting in a restaurant making small talk would only make the waiting worse. Instead, they walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and they stood in the shade of a cottonwood tree while Thomas reviewed his notes and prepared Evelyn for what was coming. Hendricks is going to try to make you look unstable, Thomas said, his voice matter-of-fact. He'll ask about your decision to run, about the conditions you exposed Noah to, about why you didn't trust the courts to protect you. He wants the judge to see a woman who makes reckless choices out of panic rather than reason. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. When he asks why you married Samuel so quickly, don't apologize for it, Thomas continued. Don't make it sound desperate or shameful. You made a choice to protect your son using the legal means available to you. That's not a crime. That's a mother doing what she had to do. What if I can't explain it the right way? Evelyn asked. What if I say the wrong thing and it sounds like exactly what he's accusing me of? Samuel stepped closer, his presence solid and steady beside her. Then I'll fix it when I testify. But you won't say the wrong thing, Evelyn. You know what happened. You know why you did what you did. Just say that. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that honesty would be enough when faced with a lawyer who twisted words for a living, and a judge who'd probably seen 100 desperate women make 100 questionable choices. Thomas checked his pocket watch. We should head back. The walk to the courthouse felt like walking to an execution. Evelyn's legs moved on their own, carrying her up the steps and through the doors, back into the courtroom that had filled up during the lunch break. More spectators now, drawn by the drama of a custody battle and the scandal of a rushed marriage. Their eyes followed Evelyn as she took her seat, and she could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Judge Carlyle returned promptly at 1 o'clock, and after settling himself, he looked directly at Evelyn. Mrs. Reed, please take the stand. Evelyn stood on legs that trembled, made her way to the witness box, and placed her hand on the Bible the bailiff held out. Her voice was barely audible when she swore to tell the truth. Thomas approached first, his expression kind but professional. Mrs. Reed, can you tell the court about the night you left Montana with your son? Evelyn took a breath and forced herself to focus. I was staying at a boarding house in Helena. Noah was asleep upstairs. I went down to the parlor to get some air, and I overheard two men talking outside the window. They were discussing plans to take Noah the next morning while I was at the market. They said Mr. Carter had authorized them to do whatever was necessary to secure the boy, and that I wouldn't be able to stop them. What did you do? I went upstairs, packed what little we had, and left. We walked through the night to get out of town before anyone could stop us. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. Because I didn't know who to trust. The men said Mr. Carter had connections, that he knew judges and sheriffs who owed him favors. I'd already been through one court battle and won, but Marcus wouldn't accept it. I was terrified that if I stayed, I'd lose Noah anyway. Thomas nodded. Tell me about the weeks that followed. So Evelyn did. She described the endless walking, the towns that turned them away, the creek water that made Noah sick, the heat that nearly killed them both. She spoke about the moment she saw Samuel's ranch appear through the haze and the desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would help them. Her voice cracked when she talked about carrying Noah to the door, about his fever and the way he'd stopped crying because he was too weak to make a sound. And when Samuel offered to marry you, what was your reaction? Thomas asked. I was shocked, Evelyn said honestly. I didn't understand why a stranger would do that, but he explained that he needed an heir and I needed protection, and it made sense. It was practical. Did you love him when you married him? The question hung in the air. Evelyn glanced at Samuel, who watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. No, she said quietly. I didn't love him. I barely knew him, but I trusted him to keep Noah safe, and that was more important than love. Thomas let that settle, then asked, And now? After living together for these past weeks? Evelyn's throat tightened. Now I know he's a good man, a kind man. He's been patient with Noah, teaching him about the ranch, treating him like... She stopped, swallowed hard. Like a son. Not because he has to, but because he chooses to. Thank you, Mrs. Reed. Thomas returned to his seat, and Evelyn braced herself. Hendricks rose with the predatory grace of a man who knew exactly where to strike. He approached the witness stand slowly, his eyes sharp. Mrs. Reed, you testified that you overheard men planning to take your son. Did you report this to the police? No. Did you tell anyone in authority what you heard? No. So we only have your word that this conversation actually took place. Evelyn's jaw tightened. It happened. Or perhaps you were looking for an excuse to run, Hendricks suggested smoothly. Perhaps you knew the probate court was going to scrutinize your ability to manage your son's inheritance, and you decided to avoid that scrutiny by fleeing. That's not true, isn't it? You had no job, no means of support, and you were living in a boarding house on credit. The inheritance was the only thing standing between you and complete destitution. I wasn't trying to steal from my son, Evelyn said, her voice rising. I was trying to protect him. By dragging him across 2 territories in the middle of summer? By exposing him to conditions that nearly killed him? Hendricks' voice was cold now. What kind of protection is that, Mrs. Reed? Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. I did the best I could with what I had. I know I made mistakes, but I never stopped trying to keep him safe. And when you arrived at Mr. Reed's ranch, how long did you know him before you agreed to marry him? A few hours. A few hours? Hendricks repeated, turning to the judge. In a few hours, Mrs. Reed managed to convince a wealthy rancher to marry her and adopt her son, securing both immediate shelter and long-term financial stability. That's quite an accomplishment. I didn't convince him of anything, Evelyn said, anger flaring. He offered. He explained what he needed and what I needed, and we made an agreement. An agreement that just happened to solve all your problems. Yes. And in exchange, what did Mr. Reed get? Evelyn stared at him. A son. I already said that. Did you offer him anything else? Hendricks' implication was clear, his tone dripping with insinuation. Thomas shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. I offered him my word, Evelyn said loudly, cutting Thomas off. She leaned forward in the witness box, her voice shaking with fury. I promised him that if he protected Noah, I would be a good wife and help him build the kind of home he wanted. That's all. And I've kept that promise every single day since. Hendricks smiled thinly. How convenient that your definition of a good wife aligned so perfectly with what Mr. Reed wanted. Objection, Thomas's voice rang out. Counsel is harassing the witness. Judge Carlyle nodded. Sustained. Mr. Hendricks, ask your questions without the editorial commentary. Hendricks shifted tactics. Mrs. Reed, do you believe your son is happy living with Mr. Reed? Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation. He's thriving. Based on what? 4 weeks of observation? Based on the fact that he smiles now, that he runs and plays instead of lying sick in bed, that he asks questions and draws pictures and feels safe enough to be a child again. And if the court were to place him with his uncle, his blood relative, do you think he would be equally happy? No, Evelyn said flatly. Because Marcus doesn't care about Noah. He cares about Noah's land. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I've watched him. I've seen the way he looks at my son, not like family, but like property, like something he owns. Evelyn's voice was steady now, certain. Samuel looks at Noah like a father. There's a difference. Hendricks studied her for a long moment, then returned to his table. No further questions. Evelyn stepped down on shaking legs and returned to her seat. Samuel reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it once, quick and reassuring. Judge Carlyle made a note, then looked at Thomas. Call your next witness. The defense calls Samuel Reed. Samuel stood and crossed to the witness stand with the same calm he brought to everything else. He was sworn in and took his seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. Thomas started with easy questions: how long Samuel had owned the ranch, his reputation in the community, his experience with children. Samuel answered each one clearly, painting a picture of a stable, successful man with deep ties to the area and a life built on hard work and integrity. Then Thomas shifted. Mr. Reed, why did you agree to marry Evelyn Carter? Samuel's answer was direct. Because I saw an opportunity that benefited us both. She needed legal protection for her son. I needed an heir to leave my ranch to. It made sense. Some might say that sounds cold, calculating. It was calculating, Samuel agreed. I don't make decisions lightly, especially ones that affect the rest of my life. But calculation doesn't mean heartless. I saw a woman willing to risk everything for her child, and I respected that. I saw a boy who deserved better than what he'd been given. I had the means to help them, and it cost me nothing I wasn't willing to give. What has it cost you? Thomas asked. Samuel considered the question. Privacy, independence, the comfortable routine of living alone. He paused. But what I've gained is worth more. I have a son who asks me questions about horses and draws pictures of the ranch. I have a wife who works beside me and doesn't complain when things are hard. I have a family again. His voice roughened slightly. I didn't think I'd ever have that after my wife died. I'd made peace with being alone. But Evelyn and Noah, they changed that. Thomas nodded and returned to his seat. Hendricks approached with the same predatory focus he'd used on Evelyn. Mr. Reed, you're a wealthy man. Surely there were other ways to find an heir. Why choose a vagrant woman and her son? She wasn't a vagrant, Samuel said calmly. She was a mother protecting her child. A mother who convinced you to marry her within hours of meeting. She didn't convince me of anything. I made my own choice. Based on what? Her charm? Her desperation? Samuel's jaw tightened. Based on the fact that she'd walked 3 weeks through hell to keep her son safe. And I admired that kind of strength. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity to acquire a ready-made family without the inconvenience of courtship. There's nothing convenient about marriage, Samuel said, or raising a child. I knew what I was taking on. Hendricks paced in front of the witness stand. Let me ask you this, Mr. Reed. If Evelyn's son didn't come with an inheritance, would you have married her? The question was designed to trap him, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Samuel met Hendricks' eyes without flinching. I don't know, he said honestly. The inheritance was part of the situation, just like Evelyn's desperation and Noah's illness. You can't separate one piece from the whole, and ask me to predict what I would have done. What I can tell you is that I made a choice based on the circumstances as they were, and I don't regret it. Because you got what you wanted. Because Noah is safe and happy, and that matters more than whatever you're implying. Hendricks' expression hardened. Mr. Reed, isn't it true that you have no experience raising children? That you've never been a father before? That's true. And yet you expect this court to believe you're better suited to raise Noah than his own uncle? I expect this court to look at the evidence, Samuel said. Marcus Carter has never shown interest in Noah until money was involved. I've been caring for him every day since he arrived. Which one of us sounds more suited? You've been caring for him for weeks, Hendricks shot back. Marcus Carter is family. A family is more than blood, Samuel said. It's showing up. It's putting a child's needs before your own wants. It's being there day after day, not just when it's convenient or profitable. He leaned forward slightly. Marcus had 2 years to build a relationship with his nephew. He didn't. I've had 4 weeks, and I've made Noah my priority every single day. That's the difference. The courtroom was silent. Hendricks stared at Samuel for a long moment, then turned away. No further questions. Judge Carlyle called for James Whitmore next, and the Guardian took the stand with his report in hand. He testified that he'd visited the Reed Ranch unannounced, that he'd observed Noah playing happily with other children from neighboring ranches, that the boy showed no signs of distress or neglect. He described the clean, well-maintained home, the adequate food and clothing, the obvious care being taken with Noah's education and well-being. In your professional opinion, Thomas asked, is Noah Carter better off in the Reed household or with his uncle? Whitmore didn't hesitate. With the Reeds, the boy has stability, affection, and a genuine family environment. I saw no evidence that would suggest otherwise. Hendricks tried to shake his testimony on cross-examination, suggesting bias or incomplete observation, but Whitmore held firm. His report was clear, his conclusions sound. When he stepped down, Judge Carlisle looked at both lawyers. Any other witnesses? Thomas shook his head. The defense rests, Your Honor. Hendricks stood. Your Honor, we'd like to call Noah Carter to the stand. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Evelyn's head snapped up, her face draining of color. Thomas was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, the boy is 6 years old. Subjecting him to questioning in open court. The child's wishes are relevant, Hendricks interrupted. He has a right to be heard. Judge Carlisle held up a hand for silence. He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. I'm not putting a 6-year-old on the stand in front of a packed courtroom. However, I will speak to him privately in my chambers. Both counsel may be present, but no one else. Evelyn's hands were shaking so hard she had to clasp them together. Samuel leaned close and whispered, Noah knows the truth. He'll be all right. But when the bailiff left to fetch Noah from Clara's care, Evelyn felt like her heart was being pulled from her chest. 15 minutes later, Noah was led into the judge's chambers, a small, book-lined room behind the courtroom. Judge Carlisle sat behind his desk, and Thomas and Hendricks took chairs against the wall. Noah stood in the center of the room, small and uncertain, until the judge gestured to a chair. Come sit, son. You're not in trouble. Noah climbed into the chair, his feet dangling above the floor. Judge Carlisle smiled gently. My name is Judge Carlisle. Do you know why you're here? Noah nodded. Mr. Reed said a man wants to ask me questions. That's right. I want to ask you about where you live and who takes care of you. Is that all right? Another nod. Good. Now, you live at Mr. Reed's ranch, is that correct? Yes, sir. And do you like it there? Noah's face brightened. Yes, sir. There's horses, and I get to help feed them sometimes. And Miss Clara makes good bread. And Mr. Reed is teaching me to ride. What about your mama? Is she there too? Yes, sir. She's there every day. She reads to me at night. Judge Carlisle made a note. Do you remember your Uncle Marcus? Noah's expression shuddered. He looked down at his hands. Yes, sir. When's the last time you saw him? Before Mama and me left. He came to our house and he yelled at Mama. He said she was stealing my papa's money and that I should go live with him instead. Did you want to go live with him? Noah shook his head hard. No, sir, he's scary. He never smiles, and he doesn't like it when I ask questions. And Mr. Reed, does he like it when you ask questions? Noah looked up, his face earnest. He answers all of them, even the ones about how cows make milk and why the sky is blue. He never gets mad. Judge Carlisle leaned back in his chair. If you could choose where to live, would you want to stay at the ranch with Mr. Reed and your mama, or would you want to go with your Uncle Marcus? The ranch, Noah said immediately. I want to stay with Mama and Mr. Reed. Why? Noah thought about it, his small face serious. Because Mr. Reed said I'm his son now, and sons get to stay with their papas. The words hung in the air. Judge Carlisle nodded slowly. All right, Noah. Thank you for talking with me. You can go back to Miss Clara now. When Noah was gone, Judge Carlisle looked at both lawyers. Gentlemen, I've heard enough. We'll reconvene in the courtroom for my ruling. They filed back out, and Evelyn searched Samuel's face desperately when he returned to the table. What happened? He chose us, Samuel said quietly. He called me his papa. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Judge Carlisle took his seat and surveyed the courtroom with the weight of someone about to make a decision that would change lives. The room fell completely silent. I've reviewed the evidence, heard the testimony, and spoken with the child at the center of this case, he began. This court is tasked with determining what arrangement best serves Noah Carter's interests, and that is the lens through which I've evaluated everything presented today." He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Carter, I don't doubt that you believe you're acting in your nephew's best interests, but the evidence suggests otherwise. You had 2 years to build a relationship with this child after his father's death, and you failed to do so. Your sudden interest in his welfare coincides suspiciously with the revelation of his inheritance, and your actions, hiring investigators to retrieve him, filing emergency petitions, speak more to urgency around financial control than genuine concern for the boy's well-being." Marcus's face darkened, but he said nothing. Judge Carlisle turned to Evelyn and Samuel. "The marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Reed is unusual in its origins. There's no question about that. It was entered into quickly, under extreme circumstances, for mutually beneficial reasons. But unusual doesn't mean invalid. The marriage is legal, the adoption proceedings are being handled correctly, and most importantly, the child is demonstrably thriving in their care." He paused, letting his words settle. "I spoke with Noah in my chambers. That boy is happy, healthy, and feels safe. He expressed a clear preference to remain with the Reeds, and while the wishes of a 6-year-old aren't determinative, they carry weight when supported by objective evidence of good care." Judge Carlisle picked up his gavel. "Therefore, this court finds that Noah Carter's best interests are served by remaining in the custody of Samuel and Evelyn Reed. Marcus Carter's petition for emergency custody is denied. Furthermore, the adoption proceedings currently underway shall continue without interference. The inheritance shall remain in trust as originally established, to be managed by court-appointed trustees until Noah reaches majority." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom. "This hearing is concluded." Evelyn couldn't breathe. The words washed over her like a wave, and for a moment she just sat there, frozen, unable to process that it was over, that they'd won. Then Samuel's arms were around her, pulling her close, and she buried her face against his chest and sobbed, great, heaving sobs of relief and exhaustion and overwhelming gratitude. "We did it," Samuel murmured against her hair. "It's over. He's ours." Thomas was shaking their hands, saying something about finalizing paperwork, but Evelyn couldn't focus on anything except the fact that Noah was safe. Marcus couldn't touch him now. The law had spoken, and for once, it had spoken in their favor. Across the courtroom, Marcus stood rigid with fury. Hendricks was speaking to him in low, urgent tones, probably discussing appeals, but Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at Evelyn and Samuel with such hatred that Evelyn instinctively pressed closer to Samuel's side. Then Marcus turned and walked out, Hendricks hurrying after him, and Evelyn watched him go with a sense of finality that felt like a door closing on the worst chapter of her life. They left the courthouse to find Clara waiting with Noah on the steps. The boy broke free as soon as he saw them and ran straight to Samuel, who caught him and lifted him up. "Did we win?" Noah asked breathlessly. "We won," Samuel confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "You're staying with us." Noah threw his arms around Samuel's neck and hugged him tight. "I told the judge you're my papa now." Samuel's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I heard," and he listened. They rode back to the ranch as a family, the summer sun finally beginning to lose some of its brutal edge as evening approached. Evelyn sat beside Samuel on the wagon bench with Noah between them, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe without fear crushing her chest. The ranch appeared on the horizon, solid and real, and Evelyn realized it looked like home. Not just shelter or refuge, but home, the place where they belonged. That night, after Noah was asleep upstairs and the house had settled into quiet, Evelyn found Samuel on the porch again. He was leaning against the railing, looking out at the darkening prairie, and she moved to stand beside him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. For fighting for us." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't fight for you, Evelyn. I fought for us. For our family." The words settled over her, warm and solid. Our family. Not a bargain anymore. Not a transaction. Something real. "When did it change?" she asked. "When did this become more than just an arrangement?" Samuel turned to look at her, and in the fading light his expression was open in a way she'd never seen before. "For me. The day Noah called me Papa, and I realized I wanted it to be true. Not just legally, but in every way that mattered. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. What about you? Evelyn thought about the weeks they'd spent building this life together. The quiet moments over breakfast, the way Samuel taught Noah with endless patience, the steadiness he brought to everything he did, the way he'd stood up in court and defended them without hesitation. I think it changed the moment you took Noah from my arms that first day, she said. You didn't have to help us. You didn't owe us anything, but you chose to, and you kept choosing us every day after. That meant something. Samuel pulled her closer, and she went willingly, resting her head against his shoulder. They stood like that as the stars began to appear one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now we finish the adoption, Samuel said. We make it permanent, and then we just keep living, raising Noah, running the ranch, building whatever this is between us. And if people talk? If they say the marriage isn't real? Samuel's arm tightened around her. Let them talk. We know the truth. That's enough. Evelyn closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Let herself believe that the running was truly over, that they were safe, that this fragile family they'd built out of desperation and necessity had somehow become something worth keeping. The summer heat lingered, but it felt different now, not dangerous, but present, a reminder of how far they'd come. Evelyn had arrived at this ranch with nothing but a dying child and a prayer. She'd married a stranger out of fear and necessity. But somewhere along the way, in the space between survival and living, they'd found something neither of them had been looking for. Not rescue, not romance, but partnership, respect, the quiet, steady building of a life that belonged to all of them. Samuel pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and Evelyn realized she was crying again, but this time from happiness instead of fear. Welcome home, Evelyn Reed, Samuel said softly. And finally, after months of running, after weeks of fighting, after a lifetime of uncertainty, Evelyn let herself believe it was true. She was home. Noah was safe. And the family they'd created, unusual and unexpected as it was real. The sun had stood still that first day, pressing down on them with heat that nearly broke them. But they'd survived it. They'd walked through fire and come out the other side not unscathed, but stronger, together. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie breathed around them, Evelyn knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else. As a family, bound not by blood or romance, but by choice and commitment and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built. The summer would eventually give way to autumn, and autumn to winter, and the seasons would turn as they always did. But Samuel's ranch would remain, solid and enduring, and so would they. Three people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and decided to make it work. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. And that